She smiled while paramedics tried to save her dying child. Not cried, not panicked, smiled. The neighbors were outside, staring. The police were inside, stunned. And Suad Mohamed Ali? She was calm, eerily calm, after what she'd just done. A young mother in a quiet Minnesota town took the life of her own 3-year-old daughter because the child wouldn't stop crying for food. Let that sit for a second, because what followed wasn't just a tragedy, it was a descent into something colder than anyone expected. If you're finding this story meaningful, we'd be grateful if you subscribe. Thank you. Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. Population, just under 3,000. A place where people still wave at each other from across the street, and most of the drama happens at school board meetings or Friday night football games. It's the kind of town where nothing bad is supposed to happen until it does. It was a warm evening on July 10th, 2023, when the silence of this quiet town cracked open like thunder. Police were called to a house on the 300 block of Northwest 1st Avenue. A child was unresponsive. Her name was Amina. She was 3 years old. Neighbors watched from their porches as flashing lights flooded the street. Some assumed it was a medical emergency. Others thought maybe someone had fallen. But what they didn't expect, what no one expected, was that inside that home, a mother had just confessed to doing the unthinkable. Suad Mohamed Ali, 28 at the time, was calm when officers arrived. No screaming, no crying. She told them her daughter had been crying for food, over and over again, and she just wanted it to stop. That's when, by her own admission, she covered her daughter's mouth and nose. Officers began CPR as paramedics rushed in. Suad? She stood there watching, reportedly with a faint smile. One officer described her expression as disturbingly detached, as if the horror unfolding in front of her had nothing to do with her. But that wasn't all. Court documents later revealed that Suad had also told investigators she tried to stab the little girl earlier that same day. Now, let's be clear. Pelican Rapids isn't some lawless outpost or hardened city. This is a tight-knit community, home to working families, retirees, and a growing number of immigrants. Suad herself was part of the local Somali community. So when word spread about what had happened inside that modest home, people were shaken. A crime like this doesn't just echo, it shatters. Even law enforcement officers, many with years of experience, admitted this was one of the hardest scenes they'd ever witnessed. And that's where it all began, in a peaceful little town with more churches than stoplights, where a young child lost her life not to an accident or illness, but at the hands of her own mother. This wasn't just a case. It was a gut punch, one that left an entire town asking, how? Why? And could anything have stopped it? Let's talk about Suad Mohamed Ali. By outward appearances, she was a young mother in her 20s, living in a modest home in Pelican Rapids. Not wealthy, not flashy, and not known around town for any particular trouble. To most, she was just another face in the community, quiet, reserved, and largely unnoticed. But behind closed doors, something was wrong. Very wrong. According to court documents, Suad had a documented history of mental illness. In fact, when she was first arrested in July 2023, the court initially found her incompetent to stand trial. She was later committed to a psychiatric facility where she remained under evaluation and care. Now, let's pause for a moment, because this part matters. It's easy to hear about a crime this horrific and immediately paint someone as pure evil. But the truth is, reality is almost always messier than that. Suad wasn't some mastermind hiding bodies in the basement. She was a deeply troubled woman who, for reasons that are still being unpacked, reached a psychological breaking point, and a little girl paid the price. Her daughter, Amina, was just 3 years old. Let that sink in. 3. Still in diapers. Still learning to speak in full sentences. She should have been picking flowers, watching cartoons, or begging her mom for more juice. Instead, her life ended on a quiet summer night in a town where things like this don't happen. According to Suad's own statements, she was overwhelmed. Amina had been crying and asking for food, and Suad just wanted her to stop. That's how she explained the suffocation. Not with rage. Not even with much emotion. Just exhaustion and detachment. Investigators would later discover even more disturbing details. Suad admitted she had tried earlier that same day to stab her daughter, though she didn't say why. No drugs were reported in her system. No known abuse reports had been filed previously. To those who lived nearby, this came entirely out of the blue. And that's where the confusion starts to take root, because people want patterns. They want reasons. If someone is going to commit something so incomprehensible, we want a red flag to point to. But in this case, the red flags were buried under silence, isolation, and untreated illness. Still, the facts don't soften the outcome. During questioning, Suad wasn't just calm, she was emotionally flat. When asked what had happened, she described the events in plain language. No tears. No real distress. That same vacant expression followed her through arrest, initial court appearances, and her eventual guilty plea almost 2 years later. Meanwhile, the town tried to make sense of the tragedy. Some community members expressed sorrow, not just for Amina, but for Suad. They wondered if her mental health had been failing for a long time, and if there had ever been a chance to intervene. Others were less forgiving. To them, the crime was unforgivable, a betrayal of motherhood and of basic humanity. What is clear is this: Suad was not a criminal mastermind. She didn't plan an elaborate cover-up. She didn't try to run. In fact, when officers arrived, she confessed almost immediately. She even told them she hadn't slept the night before. It was like she had been waiting for someone to arrive. Maybe to stop her. Maybe to listen. Maybe, just maybe, to see what she was going through before it was too late. But no one came in time. And Amina, just 3 years old, lost her life. So far, we've got a small town blindsided by a tragedy, a mother battling demons no one seemed to notice, and a little girl caught in the middle. And trust me, this case is only getting darker. It started with a phone call. At around 9:40 p.m. on July 10, 2023, emergency dispatchers received a report of an unresponsive child at a residence on Northwest 1st Avenue in Pelican Rapids. Officers with the Pelican Rapids Police Department arrived minutes later, stepping into a quiet home, and into something they weren't prepared for. 3-year-old Amina lay on the floor, unresponsive. Her mother, Suad Mohamed Ali, was in the home. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't seem confused. What she did next chilled the responding officers to the bone. Suad told them exactly what happened. She said her daughter had been crying a lot, and wouldn't stop asking for food. She said she was tired, overwhelmed, and just wanted it to end. So, in her own words, she covered the child's mouth and nose to make her stop. Let's be clear, this wasn't a panicked moment followed by denial. There was no "I don't remember," or "I didn't mean to." Suad didn't just admit what happened, she explained it. She had, quite literally, silenced her daughter. As officers began CPR and paramedics arrived, trying desperately to revive the little girl, Suad watched. And, according to a chilling police report, smiled. Not a big grin. Not laughter. Just a smile. One responder later said her demeanor felt almost disconnected from reality, as if she weren't fully present or grasping the weight of what had occurred. The smile became one of the most haunting details in the entire case. And there was more. During questioning, Suad told investigators she had tried to stab Amina earlier that same day, but didn't go through with it. She didn't say what stopped her. Maybe doubt. Maybe fatigue. Maybe nothing. But it meant one thing clearly. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It had been building. When asked if she had any regrets, Suad didn't provide the answers investigators hoped for. Her effect was flat. Emotionless, as if she had switched off. Some officers wondered if it was shock. Others suspected mental illness. Eventually, both theories would prove to hold weight. By the time medical personnel transported Amina to the local hospital, it was too late. She was pronounced dead that night. And just like that, a 3-year-old girl's life was gone. No second chances. No dramatic rescue. No twist ending. Just silence. The following day, Suad was formally charged with second-degree murder with intent, not premeditated. The criminal complaint laid out a simple and devastating narrative. A child asked for food. A mother wanted quiet. And what happened next ended a life and stunned an entire community. But here's where things get even more uncomfortable. Suad had no criminal record. There were no reports of abuse, no prior arrests, and, by all accounts, she wasn't seen as a danger to her child until that night. So why did this happen? That's the question no one in Pelican Rapids, or anywhere else, can stop asking. And the answer, as it turns out, wasn't buried in evidence or crime scenes. It was rooted in something even harder to see: untreated mental illness. After her arrest, Suad underwent psychological evaluation. She was declared incompetent to stand trial and committed to a secure mental health facility. It would take nearly 9 months of psychiatric treatment before a judge deemed her fit to face the charges. And while all of that was unfolding behind closed doors, The town of Pelican Rapids was left with only rumors, grief, and a terrible silence where a child's laughter used to be. Now here's the part that stings. This didn't happen in some chaotic, neglected part of the world. This was small-town America, the kind of place where kids ride bikes down quiet streets and neighbors know each other's dogs by name. There were no security cameras, no grainy footage, no high-speed chases or complex murder plots. This was a tragedy that unfolded over the course of a single day, inside a small house, behind a closed door, with no one watching. And yet, it changed everything, because now people were watching their neighbors more closely, watching parents with tired eyes and blank stares, watching for signs they didn't think they had to look for before. The crime itself may have taken only minutes, but its impact? That's still unfolding. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of this haunting mystery. The crime was only the beginning. What happened during the investigation will leave you speechless. From the moment Suad Mohamed Ali admitted to suffocating her daughter, the investigation had a strange air to it. There were no mysteries to solve in the traditional sense, no unknown assailants, no DNA puzzles, no whodunit tension. The person responsible was standing right there, calmly explaining what she had done. But for investigators in Otter Tail County, the challenge wasn't uncovering who did it. It was understanding why, and whether Suad truly understood the consequences of her actions. Within 24 hours of the crime, Suad had confessed twice. First to police on the scene, then again during an official interview. There were no dramatics, no shifting stories, just quiet, matter-of-fact statements. And that made things all the more unsettling. As law enforcement dug into her background, they quickly realized there were no prior police reports, no protective services cases, and no known history of abuse involving Amina. Neighbors reported seeing Suad with her daughter on walks. Some said she seemed quiet but attentive. Others admitted they barely knew her at all. But something didn't add up. Investigators were struck by her demeanor. It wasn't just detached, it was emotionally muted. One officer described her as almost robotic. Another said it was like interviewing someone who wasn't really in the room. So the focus shifted from forensic analysis to psychological assessment. Court records show that Suad was evaluated for competency not long after her arrest. The results: she was found mentally unfit to stand trial. According to Minnesota law, a person must be able to understand the charges against them and assist in their defense to proceed in court. Suad couldn't. Not then. She was committed to a psychiatric facility, where she remained under observation and treatment for months. This wasn't some legal loophole, this was a clinical diagnosis. Prosecutors had no choice but to wait. As the months passed, the public heard little. There were no press conferences, no dramatic evidence reveals, just silence, and the growing frustration of a community still trying to make sense of what had happened. Behind the scenes, though, doctors were working to stabilize Suad's mental health. Eventually, in early 2025, more than a year and a half after the crime, she was deemed competent to proceed. And from there, the legal wheels began to turn. In April 2025, Suad entered a guilty plea to second-degree unintentional murder. Not because there wasn't evidence, there was plenty, but because her mental health history made a full trial both unnecessary and emotionally volatile. The plea allowed for resolution, while acknowledging her state of mind. Even then, prosecutors didn't downplay the severity of the case. They emphasized how the crime shocked first responders, how her statements were deeply unsettling, how her actions, whatever the mental health circumstances, led to the tragic death of a young, defenseless child. But they also knew a jury trial might raise more questions than answers. And the last thing anyone wanted was to re-traumatize an entire town, or delay justice even longer. So with the plea in place, the case moved towards sentencing. By the time Suad Mohamed Ali stood before a judge for sentencing in June 2025, nearly 2 years had passed since the night she ended her daughter's life. The courtroom was quiet. The case had never been about proving guilt. Suad had admitted everything from the start. The question now was, what kind of punishment fits a crime like this when mental illness is part of the story? The prosecution laid it out plainly. A 3-year-old child, Amina, had died at the hands of the one person meant to protect her the most, her mother. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Suad had told police that she wanted her daughter to stop crying for food, and so she suffocated her. And when the police arrived, she watched paramedics try to revive the child, with what several officers described as a faint smile on her face. The state pushed for the maximum allowable sentence under the plea agreement, 150 months in prison. That's 12.5 years. There was no jury, no dramatic cross-examination, just a quiet courtroom, a guilty plea, and a sentence that felt like both too much and not enough.
A Pelican Rapids woman who previously pled guilty to second-degree murder in the death of her 3-year-old daughter was sentenced today. Suad Ali will spend 12.5 years in prison. Otter Tail County deputies responded just before 10 p.m. on July 10th in 2023 for a report of a 3-year-old girl that was unresponsive. Deputies say when they got to the home, the girl was lying on the living room floor unresponsive and had no pulse. Ali told deputies she placed her hand over the child's mouth and suffocated her after the child was crying continuously. The girl was taken to the hospital where she later died.
Too much for those who saw Suad as a mentally ill woman who had slipped through the cracks of the healthcare system, crying for help in the worst way possible. Not enough for those who believed no amount of mental illness could explain how a mother could smother her own child, confess to trying to stab her earlier, and show almost no remorse. The judge delivered the sentence with a heavy tone, 150 months behind bars, with a portion of that served as supervised release. Under Minnesota's sentencing guidelines, that meant Suad would likely spend 8 years and 4 months in prison, with about 6.5 years actually behind bars due to credit for time already served and potential good behavior. That projected release date? December 2031. The sentence was standard for second-degree unintentional murder under Minnesota law. But in the court of public opinion, there was nothing standard about this case. Some observers were frustrated. How could a mother take a life and be released in a few short years? Others pointed out, she wasn't released into freedom. She was released into a lifetime of knowing what she had done. There were no family members seen speaking publicly on her behalf. No courtroom showdowns. Just the clinical and sad progression of a case that started with sirens and ended with a quiet sentence. What stood out most wasn't the legal drama, it was the emotional vacuum. No tears, no fiery statements, no apologies. The lack of visible emotion from Suad was perhaps the most chilling part of the entire process. It made people uncomfortable, but as one local prosecutor put it, the law doesn't punish people for being mentally ill. It punishes them for what they do. And this was unthinkable. A quiet town, a mother with no criminal past, a little girl who never got to turn 4. When all the headlines fade and the court documents gather dust, what remains is a single, devastating question. Could this have been prevented? Pelican Rapids isn't a place known for violent crime. It's a tight-knit community where people tend to mind their own business, but show up when it matters. And when the story broke that Suad Mohamed Ali had killed her daughter, Amina, during what she described as a moment of mental and emotional collapse, the town was left stunned, confused, and grieving. Some wanted to blame the system. Why wasn't Suad's mental health caught earlier? Why weren't there red flags loud enough to hear? Others said the system had failed, not in catching a criminal, but in not reaching a mother on the brink. Then there's the simple, horrifying truth. Sometimes, people don't ask for help. Or if they do, it's already too late. The law stepped in as it was designed to do. 12.5 years. A third of that on supervised release. A prison sentence that, on paper, reflects justice. But for many, it will never feel like enough. Because no matter how many years Suad spends behind bars, Amina is never coming back. This case didn't end with a dramatic reveal or a shocking twist. It ended with a child's life cut short, and a community left searching for answers in the silence. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Mental illness doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes it hides behind a front door in a small town where everyone assumes everything's fine. But silence doesn't mean safety. And too often, the signs are only clear in hindsight, when it's already too late. If this story left you thinking about justice, mental health, or the lives behind the headlines, then we ask just one thing. Subscribe to this channel. We bring you real stories with real stakes, stories that reveal the cracks in the systems we trust and the people who fall through them. Your support helps us shine a light on the quiet tragedies the world forgets. Thank you for being here. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, behind every crime is a deeper truth.